Welcome to this month's Heart Bunch video. We are the Heart Extension faculty with Utah State University Extension, and we're doing a heart-to-heart segment where two Heart Extension faculty are interviewing an expert in the field. This month's video is going to be talking about how to find the right fit for finding a therapist. If that's something that you are looking for, then how do you find the right fit for you and your needs? Ashley and I are interviewing Jared Hawkins, and I'm going to turn it over to him to introduce himself, and then we'll get into the questions. So, Jared, go ahead, let us know who you are.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be here. I am Jared Hawkins. I'm a USU Extension uh, ass- assistant professor in Summit County, and I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I have been on both sides of finding my own therapists and a lot of clients trying to find the right therapist, and being on the therapist side. So excited to talk about it because it can be a difficult thing.
Thank you, Jared, for joining us. Our first question, I'm just going to jump right in, is how do you know if and when you need therapy? When should you seek out a therapist?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's no minimum threshold for seeking therapy. Anyone can seek therapy, and I think most of us probably could benefit from therapy. But the way that I think about it is within a few buckets. So the first bucket is if you're having suicidal thoughts, or if you're struggling with an addiction, or you are in some kind of abusive relationship, I would say absolutely you should seek therapy. If you are experiencing symptoms that get in the way of your day-to-day functioning or are causing you significant distress, then I would say probably you could benefit from therapy. And then the third bucket is if you are just wanting someone to talk to or check in with, or you're looking to grow, or you're looking to prevent issues from happening, then yeah, I think it could be good. But it's I'd say especially if you're noticing symptoms that are getting in the way, then I would say probably. And within that, like you, because that can encompass a lot of things. Like what are things that I should be looking for, right? And there are a lot of things, right? So you can look at are my emotions hard to regulate? Are they going up and down and they're hard to control, or are they like persistently sad or anxious? You can look at your behaviors. So, am I coping in a bad way? Am I struggling with substance use? Am I interacting poorly with other people? You can also look at physical symptoms, and sometimes we don't recognize this, but sometimes chronic pain and migraines and stomach issues and all kinds of things can be influenced by our chronic stress. So we can also look at our thought patterns. Are we thinking poorly about ourselves? Is our self-esteem low? Do we have a lot of helpless or hopeless thoughts? We can look at our relationships. Are we struggling with a lot of work or personal relationships? Is our sleep uh, bad? Are we struggling to fall or stay asleep? Or just are we struggling to adjust to life changes? So there are a lot of things that we can look for within our bodies and our lives to know if there are things that are causing us distress and getting in the way of our day to day. And I wouldn't say that, if you notice any one of those things, then you should probably go to therapy. But you kind of look at them as a whole and say, okay, are some of these getting in the way of things? And if so, I would say probably. So that's kind of a long answer to say that depends on kind of the bucket you're in, but I think anyone can benefit.
Right. Well, when someone kind of goes through and evaluates themselves and is in a position where they feel like they would benefit from seeing a therapist, what should they look for in a therapist that would fit their needs?
Yeah, this is a tough one. There are so many research studies out there about what makes therapy effective. And then this kind of goes in line with that question. So for decades, researchers have been debating this, like what makes good therapy, and what should you look for? And One thing that has always stood out to me as very interesting is that the relationship that you have with a therapist accounts for probably, and I'm not sure in the last 10 years if the research has changed, but it is about it. Your relationship with a therapist accounts for about 30% of the variance of client outcomes. And the skills that the therapist brings account for maybe only half of that. All that to say that the first thing that you should look for is a therapist who you can have a good relationship with, someone that you're on the same page with, someone that you feel comfortable opening up to. I think often therapy is effective to the degree that you can be vulnerable and share everything that you're experiencing. Because if you're holding back at all, the therapist has less to work with. So yeah, I think first priority is finding someone who you can really feel understood and safe with. But yeah, then of course I think the second thing is you want someone who has experience and skills in your issue of or your concern. And so I think this is particularly relevant for people who need some sort of therapeutic specialty. So like if you're like, oh, I just need someone to talk to, I'm not feeling great, then that probably matters less. But if you have an addiction or complex trauma, I think relationship like couples work, sex therapy, eating disorders, psychotic disorders, ADHD, autism. I think those types of things you really want to find a therapist who like that's what they do every day. That's their specialty. Um, so, but again, first priority is someone you can have a good relationship with, and then yeah, I think second priority is someone who has background in your concern.
Thank you, Jared. That's a great thing to look for, right? Is finding that therapist. And when you're talking about finding a therapist, right? If somebody is like, gosh, I really need a therapist, I would like to have one, where would you go about finding a therapist?
Yeah, it can be a journey to find the right therapist, and there are a lot of places that you can look. I think because knowing how important it is to find someone you relate with and can understand you, I think referrals are probably what I would look to first. So, do you have friends or family members or people who have a therapist they trust and think that it could be a good fit for you? Does your doctor or members of your community do they have people who they can refer you to. Apart from that, just on a practical level, therapy can be very expensive, and so you can go through your insurance to find someone who's paneled with your insurance. You can sometimes your employers will have an EAP who can provide some free therapy sessions, and that can be a good avenue. And then there's some online platforms that you could look at if you're interested in teletherapy. And I think one of the best search tools is Psychology Today. So there are a lot of therapist directories out there, and some of them are even specific um, to certain backgrounds or groups. But Psychology Today is the most common broad directory, and it's nice because you can search by, okay, I'm looking for a therapist in this state, which a therapist does have to be licensed in the state you live in. So if you're looking for online therapy, remember that. But on Psychology Today, you can look for, hey, someone in my state, someone who specializes in this issue, someone who takes this approach, and someone who takes this insurance. So you can find you can be really specific with your search on that. So that's probably the best searching tool. Um, and then sometimes local community organizations can offer more low-cost therapy if you can't get insurance to cover your sessions. So some therapists will offer like a sliding scale fee. Some university clinics will offer discounted therapy from graduate students. And so even if insurance can't cover sessions, usually there are some lower cost options.
You. So the next question might be similar to one I already asked, but I don't know if you had anything else to add. But how do you know if a therapist is the right fit?
Yeah, it can be a process because it's tough that okay, what makes the biggest difference in therapy is your relationship, but you can't predict that, you can't know that in advance while you're searching. And so that is a tough one. But luckily, a lot of therapists offer free consultations. And so with a lot of therapists, you can at least have like a 15-minute phone call, and that's free for a lot of therapists. So you can ask, okay, what's your background with this issue? You can ask a therapist, okay, here's a summary of my situation. How would you approach this? Are you panel with my insurance and things? So yeah, consultation is a great way to feel out how well you relate to the therapist too, and you can get at least a little bit of a feel in a little phone call. And then first session and in the first few sessions, you can kind of feel it out too. And I think what I would look for in those sessions is how how comfortable do I feel with the therapist? What's the degree to which I feel like I can open up and be exactly who I am and be vulnerable and be understood? How well does a therapist understand what my experience is? And do I trust them to know how to help me? So those are some of the questions that you can ask going through, the first session and after, as try to get a feel for that relationship.
Yeah. So, say you've gone through that first session and you're seeing this therapist. What advice do you have for someone who maybe feels unsure about their connection with a therapist?
Yeah, that happens a lot. I think finding a therapist is a little bit like dating in that sometimes it takes meeting a few different therapists and kind of feeling out how the relationship is. And it's totally okay to try to find a different therapist. So I would just say like trust your gut. If you're feeling off, like if you feel like I don't know if this is helpful. I don't know how well we get along. Then I would trust that, and you can scope out some other options. I will say that on the flip side of that, I think that you can work through things with your therapist like you can in any relationship. And so, if you have that benchmark level of, okay, I feel safe with my therapist, then you can work through different styles that your therapist might be taking. So I've had clients who are like, "Hey Jared, can we do sessions like this? Can you give me this type of homework, or can we talk about this?" Um, and I always love when clients do that. And so you can certainly like work through some things with your therapist and have them take a different approach. But I will say that if you just don't feel like your therapist really gets you, you don't feel safe, you don't really trust them, then yeah, I would trust that and maybe explore some other options.
I it kind of brings to mind, kind of just to end the video a little bit, but understanding that it's not only you as the client kind of taking what the therapist is doing and saying and how they're reacting or acting, but it's also you have that control and that power and that ability to engage in that relationship to make it stronger, to make it more impactful, make it more useful and something that both of you can benefit from as well. Because I think therapists also benefit from that interaction, like you said, Jared. When you have clients who engage in that and ask questions and ask for different accommodations or different changes or techniques or something that they like and that they really respond to. That's a good thing to remember for anybody who is looking for a therapist and or in therapy or working with a counselor, that it's as much, you're as important or even probably more important, but being able to work in that kind of that relationship and that structure. So
Absolutely. Yeah, uh I would say that a lot of the therapeutic change that happens, especially in individual therapy, happens from uh, growing or progressing the relationship between the therapist and the client. And a lot of the times, that's where kind of the magic happens. Is the client is learning to be vulnerable or learning to uh, to change within that relationship, and that kind of carries over into other relationships. So absolutely.
Well, is there anything else that you wanted to share before we end?
Yeah, just that. Yeah, finding a therapist can be a kind of a tough journey, and I mean it's kind of like finding medication. Sometimes it's kind of trial and error. But I would say if you've had a negative experience in the past, um, don't let that define how therapy will always be. And if if you're struggling to find someone who takes your insurance or who doesn't have a wait list, uh, that can be a difficult process. But finding the right fit can change your life. It can be absolutely transformative, and so it's worth going through the struggle of finding the right fit because I've had therapists who, some of them have been uh, helpful and good, but then others have been like life changing, and so trying to find the right fit is worth it.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. And, thank you again to Jared for providing his time and his expertise on this topic. And that kind of concludes our video. So if you enjoyed this content, then you can check out the USU Extension's Heart Initiative on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube and Twitter. And you can like and subscribe to all of our stuff so you get updates whenever we post new content. And we really appreciate your time and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.